While my half-sister got designer clothes, private school, and a stable home, my brother and I were fighting over secondhand shoes in silence. Everyone worships her like she's flawless, but they forgot the kids left behind. I'm still hurt, and no one understands why it cuts so deep after all these years. When I was 13, I lived in a house with my brother, half-sister and dad and stepmom. Upstairs there were 2 bedrooms and a small nursery. My brother has a bedroom downstairs. My parents swapped my bedroom with my half-sister's because she had more toys. So the 1-year-old had my old room with my double bed and I was in the tiny nursery that fit a small daybed and a single wardrobe, with barely 2 feet gap to walk back and forth. I stayed in that room until I was 17 years old and moved out to live with my mom. I am 29 now, and when I have a good relationship with my dad and stepmom, but when I think back at this memory I feel bitter and hurt. As an adult I cannot make sense of that decision, and it's obvious that my stepmom had her actual child. I was secondary. My sister is now and we have a good relationship, but honestly I am jealous because she lives a life I never had. They go on vacations abroad and expensive cruises 4 times a year. They have been to Disneyland several times, something me and my brother were promised growing up but never got to do. My sister goes on expensive school trips in places like New York, and at her age I was told I couldn't go to any trips. Whereas I was working since I was 15, my sister is overprotected and my stepmom won't let her work and discourages her to not take driving lessons. She has received $30 pocket money every week since she was 12, whereas my brother and I had $3 growing up. My stepmom is a housewife and my dad is in the same job for 20 years and retiring soon. He might be in a better financial position now than he was before, but honestly it would not be too much of a difference. I am jealous and bitter, although I have never and will never show it, as will I never hold it against my sister for having these things. I wish the difference in treatment between us was because of improved finances, but I know it isn't. I am hurt by it and feel second best. Ada for still having these feelings, and am I being petty? The first time she saw the room, it was a tiny, box-shaped space with walls painted a soft, eggshell white. The carpet was a faded shade of pink, worn down by the constant pitter-patter of her brother's sneakers and her own bare feet. It had been a nursery once, for a child that was no longer there. Now, it was her room. A single, small daybed hugged one wall, a wooden wardrobe the other. The bed took up almost half the room, leaving a narrow strip of floor to walk from door to bed. Her stepmom had shown her the space with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's cozy," she'd said, her voice a little too bright. Perfect for a young lady, but she knew it wasn't perfect. It was a room for a much younger child, one who hadn't yet outgrown the plastic toys that littered the floor, who didn't need space to stretch out or breathe. She'd nodded, trying to hide the disappointment that threatened to spill out. Her brother looked at her, his expression a mirror of her own. They'd been through this before, the shifting of places, the subtle but unmistakable messages about their relative worth, but they didn't say anything. They never did. It was their unspoken pact, forged in the quiet moments when the adults weren't watching. They'd stick together, share what they had, and make the best of it. The years passed slowly, each one marked by the suffocating sameness of her tiny room. The walls seemed to shrink as she grew, the space becoming a prison cell rather than a sanctuary. She'd lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining what it would be like to have a place that was truly her own. A place where she could spread her books and clothes without worrying about making a mess. A place where she could invite friends over without feeling like she was taking up too much space. As her half-sister grew, so did the disparity in their lives. The vacations, the school trips, the endless supply of new clothes and gadgets, it was all laid out before her like a feast she wasn't allowed to touch. She watched from the sidelines as her sister's life unfolded, filled with experiences she'd never have. And with each new opportunity her sister was given, the ache in her chest grew a little more. The day she moved out, she took one last look around the room that had held her captive for so long. The pink walls seemed to mock her now, a constant reminder of her second-class status. But she refused to let it define her. She packed her bags, her heart light with the promise of a new life, a life where she wouldn't have to hide her feelings or her jealousy. She was determined to carve out her own path, to find her own way of feeling special. Her relationship with her dad and stepmom had improved over the years, the tension between them smoothing into something resembling affection. But the memory of that cramped room never left her, a ghost that lingered in the shadows of her mind. And when she saw her sister's pictures on social media, living the life she'd always dreamed of, she couldn't help but feel a stab of bitterness. It wasn't fair, she knew, but fairness was a concept that had abandoned her a long time ago, when she was shunted into the nursery to make room for someone else's happiness. Now, as a successful 29-year-old woman, she had her own place, her own career, and her own sense of identity. Yet the sting of those childhood moments remained, a dull throb that never quite disappeared. She knew she wasn't being rational. that she shouldn't hold on to the past. But it was hard to shake the feeling that she'd been cheated, that her childhood had been a series of sacrifices for a family that hadn't been her own. And when her friends talked about their vacations and their family's support, she'd smile and nod, all the while feeling the weight of what she'd lost. But she never talked about it. Not really. She didn't want to be that person, the one who couldn't let go of old grievances. So she buried her feelings deep, tucked them away under layers of good manners and forced cheerfulness. And she hoped that one day, when she looked back on her life, she'd see it not as a series of missed opportunities, but as a story of resilience and strength. A story of a girl who grew up in a too-small room, but somehow managed to claim her own space in the world. One afternoon, while helping her dad sort through some old boxes, she stumbled upon a diary. It was hidden in the back of the wardrobe, buried beneath dust and forgotten memories. It was her mother's, a relic from a time before she'd even been born. She'd never met her mother, but she felt a strange kinship with the woman who had filled these pages with her thoughts and dreams. The diary was a revelation. It was filled with tales of her mother's own struggles, her hopes for her children, and her love, so much love, for the two of them. Her mother had written about the joy she'd felt when she'd first held her in her arms, the way her heart had swelled when she'd seen her first smile. There were pages detailing her mother's pride in her achievements, her hopes for her future, and her fears of not being there to watch her grow. As she read, the walls of the nursery grew thinner, the air less stifling. For the first time, she understood that her mother had loved her fiercely, had seen her not as a burden or an afterthought, but as a gift. And in the quiet of that room, surrounded by the echoes of the past, she realized that she'd been carrying a weight that wasn't hers to bear. It was her stepmom's insecurity, her father's guilt, the baggage of a family torn apart by loss. The diary didn't erase the bitterness completely, but it did give her a new perspective. Her childhood hadn't been perfect, but it had been loved, and as she turned the final page, she knew that she had to let go of the hurt, to make room for the love that had always been there, hidden in the corners of her heart. The following weekend, she went to visit her sister, armed with a newfound sense of peace. They talked for hours, sharing stories and laughs, and she noticed that the gap between them didn't feel as wide as it once had. Her sister spoke of her own struggles, the pressures of being the favorite, the fear of losing her place in their father's heart. And in that moment, she saw that they were both just two people trying to find their way in a world that didn't always make sense. The vacations, the money, the attention, none of it had brought her sister the happiness she'd always assumed it would. They were both just trying to fill the space that had been left when their mother had passed away. And as they sat together, she knew that the only way to truly move forward was to build a new kind of family, one that didn't rely on the whims of a stepmother or the limitations of a small room. A family that was defined by their shared love and understanding, not by what they had or hadn't been given. As she hugged her sister goodbye, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't letting go of the past, but she was choosing to carry it differently. And with each step she took towards the door, she knew that she was walking away from the nursery for good, ready to embrace the life that waited for her outside those pink walls. Over the next few months, she made a conscious effort to bridge the gap between them. She called her sister more often, asked about her school, her friends, her dreams, and slowly, her sister began to open up, sharing her fears and frustrations, the pressure of being the center of their dad and stepmom's world. It was a revelation, hearing the girl she'd once envied speak of feeling trapped by expectations, of wanting a life that was more than just material wealth. One evening, they sat in the living room of their childhood home. The room that had once felt so oppressive now bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. Her sister looked at her with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of their shared history. "You know," she began tentatively, "I've always felt guilty for having so much, like I didn't deserve it." Her heart swelled with a mix of sadness and compassion. "You didn't do anything wrong," she replied, taking her sister's hand. "We're all just trying to find our place in this messed up world." They talked for hours that night, sharing secrets and fears they'd never voiced before. Her sister spoke of her own feelings of inadequacy, the fear that she was only loved for what she had, not for who she was. And as they talked, they both began to understand the complex web of emotions that had woven their lives together, the love, the jealousy, the pain. They saw each other not as rivals, but as siblings bound by shared experiences and a desire to be seen and heard. The conversation didn't fix everything. It couldn't erase the years of feeling like the odd one out, the one who didn't quite fit, but it was a start. A crack in the foundation of the resentment that had built up over the years. And as they sat there, two young women on the cusp of adulthood, they made a pact to support each other, to be honest about their feelings, and to fight for a relationship that was more than just a product of their upbringing. The air was thick with emotion, the tension of the past giving way to the promise of a new future. They hugged tightly, feeling the warmth of connection that had been missing for so long. It was the first time in years that she felt truly seen by someone who had grown up in the same house, under the same roof. And as she held her sister close, she knew that this was what it felt like to finally come home. Her thoughts turned to others who might be feeling the same way she had. Kids who were stuck in their own metaphorical nurseries, yearning for more. It was then she decided to channel her pain into something positive. She began volunteering at a local community center, mentoring a young girl named Lily. Lily's story was not unlike her own. A troubled home, a lack of resources, a feeling of being overlooked. But she saw in Lily's eyes the same spark that had kept her going all those years. Every week, she'd meet with Lily, sharing her own experiences and offering guidance. They'd do homework together, talk about life, and dream about the future. The girl looked up to her with wide, hopeful eyes, and she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known in a long time. As they sat at a small table, surrounded by the bustle of the center, she'd listened to Lily's stories, her heart breaking and healing with each word. Through Lily, she discovered that she could make a difference, that her own struggles didn't have to define her, but could be a catalyst for change. And as she watched Lily grow in confidence, she began to realize that perhaps her own childhood wasn't a prison, but a foundation upon which she could build something beautiful. Her relationship with her sister continued to strengthen, their bond forged in the fire of shared understanding and empathy. And so, she carried on, each step away from the nursery a step closer to the woman she was meant to be. Her heart was lighter now, filled not with bitterness, but with the joy of giving back. And as she watched Lily blossom, she felt a strange sense of peace. It was as if by helping someone else find their place in the world, she'd found hers. The walls of her past no longer loomed over her, but had instead become a part of the foundation that held her up. And she knew, in that moment, that she wasn't just the girl from the too-small room. She was a survivor, a mentor, a sister, and a daughter, flawed, but full of love. Lily's eyes shone with excitement as she talked about her dreams of becoming a doctor, of healing people like her mother had never been able to. And she listened, her own heart swelling with pride. It was in these moments that she realized she'd found her purpose, to be a beacon for those who felt lost, to show them that even in the darkest of rooms, there was a way out. Her weekly meetings with Lily became the highlight of her week, a reminder that she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. The community center buzzed with the energy of those seeking refuge, a place where the walls didn't whisper of past hurts but sang of future possibilities. And as she sat with Lily, surrounded by the laughter and chatter of other children finding their way, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known since those early days in the nursery. It was here, amidst the chaos and the hope, that she found her voice, her place in the tapestry of life. And so, she continued to mentor, her heart growing with every story she heard, every smile she saw. She knew that she couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future. And as she watched the kids play and learn, she thought of her own childhood, of the moments she'd felt invisible. And she vowed, silently, to ensure that no child in her care would ever feel that way. It was a promise she made to herself, to her mother, and to the girl who'd once lain on a too-small bed dreaming of more. It was a promise that fueled her, that made her heart beat a little faster. Because she knew, deep down, that she was more than just a product of her environment. She was a force for change, a light in the darkness. And as she looked at Lily, her eyes full of hope, she knew that together, they could conquer any challenge that came their way. One day, while going through some old paperwork, she stumbled upon a letter. It was addressed to her, in her mother's handwriting. She recognized it immediately, the loop of the Y, the way she'd always underlined her name with a flourish. Her heart racing, she opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a will, detailing an inheritance she never knew existed. Her mother had left her a sum of money, not for material things, but for something much more precious, the chance to make a difference. The words on the page blurred as she read them, her eyes filling with tears. She had been given a gift, a chance to honor her mother's memory in a way that mattered, and she knew exactly what she had to do. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone and called her sister. "I've found something," she said, her voice shaking, "something that will change everything." The two of them sat at the kitchen table, the will laid out before them. They read it together, their father's eyes misty with regret for what could have been. "We need to use this to make sure no one else feels the way we did," she said, her voice firm. "We need to start a scholarship program, for kids like us, who just need a chance." Her sister nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. "We'll call it the Luminous Legacy," she said, looking up. "For Mom." And with that, their mission became clear. They would turn their pain into something beautiful, a beacon of hope for those who needed it most. The scholarship would be more than just money. It would be a declaration that every child deserved the opportunity to shine. They worked tirelessly, setting up the fund, reaching out to schools and community organizations. They shared their story, their mother's story, and the legacy they wanted to build. And as the news spread, donations began to roll in. People were touched by their resilience, by their determination to make a change. They saw themselves in the faces of the children they were helping, heard echoes of their own struggles in their stories. And as they watched the first recipient of the Luminous Legacy Scholarship walk across the stage at their graduation, they felt a sense of pride that washed away the bitterness of the past. They had turned their nursery into a launchpad, their mother's love into a lifeline for others. And in that moment, they knew that they weren't just sisters, but co-conspirators in a grand design, weaving together the threads of their mother's legacy into something that would live on, long after they were gone. The scholarship grew, year by year, sending more and more children to college, giving them the tools to break the cycle of their circumstances. And as she stood before the crowded auditorium, handing out awards, she felt her mother's presence, a warm glow that filled the space. It was as if she was standing beside her, whispering, "You did it. You made a difference." And she knew that she was more than just the girl from the too small room. She was a woman of substance, a force for good, a creator of futures. And as the applause washed over her, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. The nursery was finally just a memory, a stepping stone on the path to her true destiny.